to the third and final session of How to Land Your Dream Job or Internship, brought to you by Creative University. This was really just started as a give back, and as a platform to connect students to media, entertainment, and tech opportunities. And the idea for this webinar really came about from me talking to different students and kind of trying to get a sense of where I could help people out and what sorts of resources I could provide. So the first two parts happened last two Saturdays. I talked about networking and then also resume and cover letters. And today's session is going to focus on interviewing. I also invited my colleague at Bulldog, Nina Zymek, to speak to us about her experiences getting internships and working at companies like AEG, Scoremore, and Superfly. And she graduated from Tulane just last year. So I think she has a lot of relevant experience to share with people. And I thought it'd be interesting to hear from someone who just went through the process recently herself. I'm Anum. I'm born and raised in LA. Went to UCLA for undergrad, and that really just gave me, access to live music and events, and really just started my trajectory in the field. Once I started going to these events, I realized this was the field I wanted to be in, and I just did whatever I could to try to get different opportunities. So, for me, this is one of my favorite quotes. It was actually told to me by the student body president at UCLA, and she said, "Don't let school get in the way of your education." I think oftentimes we can kind of get hung up on academics and kind of the school part of school, but for me, I always thought of it as this is a stepping stone to my real life, which was going to come about after I graduated and I was working full time. So I just focused all my efforts on getting internships, getting jobs, getting my foot in the door at different companies, essentially. So, on the left side, you can see some tickets to early events I went to. I think pretty much everyone in live music has that one event that changed their life. And for me, that was EDC Vegas. Starting out going to these shows, that really just motivated me to get my foot in the door. And on the right is me and my friends at Swedish House Mafia's last show in LA in 2013. So, come from a big electronic music background, live events background. Quick timeline about my life: graduated from Whitney High School in 2009, UCLA in 2013. I got my first job at Insomniac Events, and that started really as an internship that I had my senior year of school. And, I graduated, and that was 2013 was the year that Insomniac was getting bought by Live Nation. So I was part of the team that founded the editorial department and really started creating content around all the shows that we were producing. And I've talked to a couple of students offline about this experience as well, and happy to chat with people after this also. Worked at Live Nation and Insomniac for a couple of years. Then, I decided to just move abroad, and, I wanted to I wanted to just build my experience outside of LA and try something new. So moved to the Middle East without a job, which now in hindsight sounds really crazy, but at the time, I told myself I'm going to go. I had family in the Middle East, so I wasn't going completely blind, but definitely moved without a job. Just started networking, using a lot of the same techniques I've shared with people in my previous my previous videos, and landed my role at Trimo Theme Parks, building the country's first theme parks. Did marketing there. Really enjoyed kind of expanding beyond content creation to more PR branding, more, overall umbrella marketing. And this was the time I decided to get my MBA. My goal there was to really learn more about finance, operations, more of the quantitative side of media and entertainment. So I applied to business school from Qatar, got into Columbia, spent 2 years there. And also I've talked to some students about, who are considering business schools or a graduate school. So if that's something you're interested in, also happy to share more details about that offline. And then, graduated last year during the pandemic. So, for people that are now looking for new opportunities, or you may be graduating this year, I definitely understand what that's like. And, just through networking and the story that I shared earlier, reaching out to Peter, learning about Creative University, I was able to get connected to Bulldog, which is where Nina and I both work right now. And this is a list of different places that I interned. This is both from undergrad and graduate school. And, there was no one way that I got any of these opportunities. Most of my luck has always been through cold emailing, through, reaching out to people. I haven't really had much luck applying through formal processes. And, when it comes to interviewing, I think there's a lot of similarities across different media and consumer companies, because a lot of times they're looking for that same sort of things, which include things like cultural fit, passion for the industry that you're in. And those are all things that Nina and I will get into in a little bit. And, the main thing, I think I mentioned this in every session, and this is something that our speakers and industry executives have mentioned, is that networking and building relationships is still number one. Even when it comes to interviewing, this is still the most important thing. And a lot of this is legwork that comes beforehand, building those relationships, doing outreach before you're even applying to opportunities, so that you have people that can vouch for you and that know the value that you bring to companies. Because sometimes you may be the most qualified person who got to the interview round, but you still may not get a position. That's just the reality of the world. And whatever you can do to really make yourself known, and also, show that you're genuinely interested in the company and the people who work there, is always helpful. And, for more details on networking, I encourage you to see my first seminar that is on the Creative University YouTube channel, where I go into a lot of kind of tactical ways of reaching out and networking that have worked for me, especially in this time when things can be a little more challenging. So that's a quick overview. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Nina, who's going to share her background and how she got her roles in entertainment and how she landed her role at Bulldog now.
Thanks, Anum. Hi guys, I'm Nina, and I want to thank Anum for inviting me on here today. I'm really excited to share my story and share some of my experiences. And, I just hope that if there's one, you can take away one thing from something that I'm sharing today, and maybe it'll help you in the future. So a little bit of a background about who I am. I grew up in Northern California, and I moved to Memphis, Tennessee when I started high school. It was a big shift, but people always ask what happened. My dad got a new job, so I moved across the country. But I don't think I would have ended up at Tulane had I not moved to the South otherwise. So I went to Tulane, as Anna mentioned, for my undergrad, graduated this past May in the middle of a pandemic with a Bachelor's of Science in Marketing and a minor in Legal Studies. And similar to Anum's story and many, many other people I know who work in the live events industry or the music industry, you fell in love as a participant, and you kind of just think, how can I do this? How can I make this my job one day? And so, my first festival I went to was Bonnaroo in 2015. And, that experience kind of shaped my whole career path, and, shaped a lot about what I wanted to do with my life, career-wise, and just, kind of like a personal philosophy almost. If you can change it in them. Thank you. Okay, so like I mentioned, I had this moment in high school. How do I get a job doing this? So I went to Bonnaroo, and I was going into my senior year of high school. And if your parents were anything like mine, they were already asking you, what do you want to major in college? What do you want to do as a job? And it's like, Mom, I'm still in high school. But I went to Bonnaroo, and I realized one, this was the most awesome experience I had ever had as a 16-year-old. And two, somebody got paid to do this. It was somebody's job to make this happen. So on a whim, I was like, maybe I can make this my job. And I told my parents, and of course they laughed. But I went to another festival, Buku, which is in New Orleans, the same city that Tulane is in. And I went there the spring of my senior year, when I was still deciding on, which colleges I wanted to go to. And I actually went back to Tulane and toured again and met with the academic advisor. Funny story, I actually was deferred from Tulane when I applied initially, and I went back on this trip that I also went to Buku and met with the admissions counselor. And I'm pretty sure she pushed my application through because a week later I got accepted to Tulane on a scholarship. So that's a little tip for anyone who's applying to colleges. If you can visit, I know it's kind of hard in COVID times, but make sure you have that, just like networking for a job, developing that networking with your admissions counselor can be really, really helpful too. All right, you can click next. So here's an overview of kind of my background. So in 2016, I graduated from Houston High School in Tennessee, and then I started college at Tulane in the fall. And my first semester in New Orleans, I was kind of just getting the lay of the land, knew that I wanted to pursue music. New Orleans was a great city for that, but I had some trouble kind of getting my foot in the door. So the following spring, Buku's in March every year, I applied to volunteer at Buku as a festival volunteer. And I kind of had a feeling that maybe it would interfere with some of my class schedules because the festival's on Friday, and when you volunteer, you normally have to work all day and get there kind of early. But I did it anyways, and I somehow got accepted. And Buku actually does this really great program for their volunteers. They offer these informational sessions that are geared towards, people who are in their college years looking for more experience, just looking for more knowledge about anything that goes into making a festival. So I went to one of those, and I actually met the marketing manager at Winter Circle Productions / AEG Presents, which is the promoter that puts on Buku. So I introduced myself and, just kind of wanted to make myself known that I was volunteering, that this is a passion of mine, that I had applied to get on their street team before, hadn't heard back. And, she said, thanks for introducing yourself. We'll see what we can do. So they actually changed my volunteer position at the festival to work under their department after I went up and introduced myself. I was doing something completely unrelated to marketing before then, and they moved me under their department. So it just kind of shows the power of putting yourself out there, even though sometimes it's hard, sometimes you can be a little shy. But I think that one moment where I decided to put myself out there had a huge impact on my career trajectory. So obviously after I volunteered, I got, started to get to know the company a little bit better, and I was on their street team, kept working really hard at it. And then they asked me to be their intern, or they asked me to apply for their internship the following summer. So I interned there, and the next fall, I had a remote internship through my university at Score More Shows. They are bought out by Live Nation, and they're a big concert and festival promoter in the Texas area. And then the following summer, I interned at Superfly doing operations and productions in their San Francisco office. And although I worked on a few different corporate events and conventions, the main project I worked on was Outside Lands. And the last semester of my college year, I was a part-time student. So I actually started doing some freelance festival and event work. For AEG, I worked at a venue in New Orleans. I worked at Voodoo under C3. I worked the college football playoff national championship in New Orleans at the Superdome. And then I also worked at Wakan Fest, all while I was still in school, which was definitely a balancing act, but great if you're a part-time student. And then, as I mentioned already, I graduated from Tulane in May, and I started working at Bulldog in July. So the Tulane motto is the unofficial Tulane motto, I should say, is work hard, play hard. Tulane was rated the #1 party school, I think in 3 years ago or last year. But Tulane students obviously know how to manage their lives and manage that academic, fun workload. And throughout my college experience, as I mentioned, I definitely learned how to balance it as well. And here are just some photos. On the left side is actually when I volunteered at Buku my freshman year of college, kind of the weekend that, looking back, started it all. And then the next photo is me as a street team member outside of all of the shows with my ginormous sign. And the next photo is me interning at Superfly at Outside Lands. That's my boss next to me. And the last photo is my graduation pictures, and I put dreams do come true in New Orleans on my cap because I think New Orleans made my dreams come true. So now for some tips that I've learned throughout the years. Obviously, there's no one size fits all solution for how to find a job. There's no recipe or secret sauce, but the main thing is, like Anum has emphasized before as well, networking and getting your materials in the right person's hand is still number one. I mean, it's so important to have a contact on the inside before you're even applying for jobs, before you're going into the interview. You really want to have those personal relationships developed, and I know that's, not always easy sometimes, but that was always my number one goal, was how can I get a contact on the inside of this company? Who can I build a relationship with? But let's say you get the interview, what should you do to hopefully land the job? So these are some of my guiding principles that I learned over the years of interviewing, from my dad, from my career counselor, from trial and error, and hopefully some of these will be beneficial to you. So the number one rule is do not go in blind. You should always practice beforehand. And I know that might seem intuitive, but it didn't for me. You should always practice beforehand, bullet point down some things you want to say, some reasons why you're a good fit. It doesn't have to be anything too overly complicated, especially for internship interviews, but especially for job interviews, you definitely want to practice beforehand. And that goes hand in hand with having defined reasons why you're passionate about the job and the company. And, that kind of leads into telling your story. So for me, when I applied at Superfly, I had applied for the same internship 3 years in a row and got denied. And so in my application, I'd always included my story about I went to Bonnaroo, which is a Superfly festival. I moved to New Orleans. The founders went to Tulane as well. And, I fell in love with music. But, I told my story, but it took me 3 years of telling my story to finally get an interview. So, don't give up. That's another, note from that story, is like, don't give up when you don't get the internship or the interview the first time. Keep trying. But, in order to stand out from a pool of thousands of other applicants, you need to have a story that's memorable. So make sure you tell that. And just be knowledgeable, like Anum said earlier, do your research on the industry, some company updates, look up the person who's interviewing's LinkedIn if you haven't already, so you can ask them a little bit like, I see you worked at this company beforehand. What, how did that lead to you getting here? People love to talk about themselves, and it also show that you're interested in them as a person and you're interested in them as working there in the company. So this next tip, bring a physical copy of your resume and job description. My dad actually told me this, and I didn't listen to it for most of my interviews. And then I actually went to an interview where they gave me a physical copy of my resume and my job description. And then I realized my dad was right. I totally should have done this, because you can use that as a reference during your interview. No one's going to get mad at you, or it's not an issue if you look down at your resume. If you look at the job description, it's super helpful to have both of them there in front of you, so you can tie your resume into the job description specifically and kind of tailor, your talking points around that. So I know, like, we're all used to digital, but it's a really great tip that I definitely benefited from in my most recent job interview. And, try to relax. They're looking to see your personality and whether you're a cultural fit. So don't try too hard. Don't be too nervous. I know everyone gets nervous. I was like sweating, waiting in the waiting room for all my interviews pretty much. But, try your best to just remain calm and cool. And then a few more tips. And this is like when you're actually interviewing, focus on what you did and how you handled it when answering questions. My career counselor at my university gave me this advice. And when we were doing mock interviews, she said, you know, you have all these great experiences, but the way you're telling them, the narrative you're sharing doesn't show that you handled that was your responsibility. It shows, oh, well, my team did this, but what did you do for your team? You know, how did you handle it? What did you contribute? So try your best to focus to answer questions with I, not my team, my boss, my department, if applicable. And, you know, I kind of mentioned this a little bit already, but don't expect to know it all. No one expects an intern to know everything. You know, just it's more about just a personality and cultural fit. I mean, you're an intern. If you're applying for internships, the whole point of an internship is to learn about the job, the role, the company, etc. So, you know, don't worry about not knowing too much. And then this tip, flip the interview. So people always think an interview should be a one-way, you know, interaction, like a person, the interviewer is asking the interviewee questions. Well, actually, if you flip the interview and you know, start asking the person interviewing you questions, like I mentioned, about their job, about their background, about the department, the company, etc. One, it's a really great way to show that you're very interested and engaged, and you know, you're thinking about things on a deeper level. Two, it's a really great way to also buy time in an interview if you feel like, you know, you don't want to talk about yourself for an hour or 30 minutes, or you know, you want that break to kind of recompose yourself if you're getting a little bit nervous. So it's a great way to kind of ease that stress, and also show that you're really interested. And then when you're ending the interview, you always want to close with a quick recap of your education, experience, qualifications, and passion. And this is like a 2 to 3 sentence, you know, just again, you know, just as a reminder, my name is Nina. I am qualified for this because of my educational background. I have a marketing degree from Tulane. I've interned at AEG, Superfly, Score More Shows. I'm now working at Bulldog Digital Media. I have been working in this industry for X number of years, and you know, something along those lines. It's not just a quick recap. So that's the last thing in their mind when you walk out of the room, you know, is okay, this is why we should choose this person. That's really where you're selling yourself. And then always send a thank you follow-up email. That is super important as well. So although all of those are great tips, arguably the best resource out there, if available, seek help from your college career center and advisors. They have so many resources available at their disposal for you. You know, numerous amounts of, you know, standardized interviewing questions, exams. You know, they will know the most asked questions on interviews. They can prep you to answer those questions in ways that are going to make you stand out from other people. They also will help you with your resume, they'll help you with applications, they'll give you advice, they'll help you with networking strategies. You know, my college advisors, as I graduated, you know, last year, where everything was just thrown up into the air because of COVID, you know, my college advisors actually formed a weekly, it was a twice a week online advising group over Zoom. So me and about 6 other students would meet in this Zoom room, and we would share, you know, places we had applied for, any good, like anything we found that had worked, things like that. And my advisors were so helpful with preparing for any interviews. So definitely don't overlook that as a resource if you do have that available.
Awesome. Thanks, Nina. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
That's it for right now, but if I think of anything else, I will be sure to share.
Cool. Yeah, so as I mentioned, Nina and I worked together at Bulldog, and I thought her story was really great because, you know, similar to me, she graduated last year, but I think graduating it from undergrad, you know, without having the opportunity to work full time was especially challenging. So I thought it'd be helpful for people to learn how she navigated those times. And I thought it was interesting how there were so many parallels between my story and hers. It took her 3 years to get an internship at Superfly, and for me, it took me a year to get an internship at Insomniac. And in both cases, we just kept trying, kept reaching out, trying different techniques, and we both talked about how that's something people don't tell you or discuss as often as how do you deal with rejection, or when you're trying and you're just not hearing back, or you may be the most qualified person getting interviewed and you still may not get the position. Because sometimes things do happen where someone knows someone or someone's a friend of someone, and there's no sort of secret way of sort of dealing with that. But I think just trying new things, and just this week someone told me that they got to the final round for a job that they really wanted and unfortunately didn't get it. And I told her, this is still a contact that you have. They know that you're qualified if you made it to the final interview. So keep that relationship warm, send them a thank you. Again, reiterate your interest in the role, your background. If you see any news or anything in the future that you can message the interviewer about, just as a quick, hey, hope everything's going well. I saw, your company is doing this that I thought was really interesting. Any sort of way to keep that relationship going, in an organic and natural way, I think is always helpful, because as our stories show, it can often take multiple tries to get your foot in the door. And I think that anyone who's worked in this field has dealt with something like that. So just something helpful to keep in mind if maybe you are sort of dealing with that sort of challenge. So I thought I'd go into some questions that I always like to be prepared for, and then some tactical tips when it comes to interviewing. So, tell me about yourself, standard question. Everyone should be prepared. And as Nina mentioned, practice. For me, when I practice in my room and hear myself say the answers, that helps reinforce how I'm going to answer it when it actually comes time to interviewing. So definitely helps. The next slide, I'll go into kind of an outline I follow for that specific question. What types of music, movies, or TV shows are you into? I think people sometimes get so caught up in the formal questions that they forget that the interviewer wants to know, why are you passionate about what you're interviewing for and that specific company? And if you don't showcase that passion, that's definitely a reason for you to get passed up. And this is also a place where you can be a little bit more casual, like for music, I may answer someone and say something like, I haven't been the biggest fan of Taylor Swift's pop music, but I love the music she came out with during the pandemic. And I think her 2 recent albums have been great. And I've, really connected with them. So kind of using this as a way to showcase your personality, and especially if you can be critical or sort of critique what's happening in the industry you're interviewing for, that is a great way to stand out, because it shows you're really passionate, but you're also able to, think about what's actually happening in the field that you're interested in. And, even better if you can tie it back to specific artists for the company that you're interviewing at, specific TV shows that production company has produced. So, don't take for granted that this is a key question that people will ask specifically for media interviews. Why this company? Why this role? This is, I think, another obvious one, but you want to bullet point a couple of main points for this sort of answer. Why this company? There's so many different ways to research this. If it's a public company, look into their public filings and see what they're saying about how they're changing their strategy, what the mission and vision is. If you can tie in that to any sort of answer, that's always really great. For why this role, one thing I like to do is go on LinkedIn and look up people that work in the department and look up what they're actually doing. And that's a good way of, building your answer beyond what's in the job description. So for example, if you're interviewing for a marketing intern role, you may say, I want to learn how you reach new customers, how you sell tickets to your shows. But if you go on LinkedIn, you may see that the brand manager at this company is focusing on building their influencer campaign. So if you tie that into answering the question and, incorporating that detail of, I saw you're developing your influencer program, and that's an area that I've been really interested in, and I also have experience in this. I think that just kind of helps people get a leg up. What are your short and long-term goals? Again, I don't personally love answering this question because I think, I'm just not someone that has like, 5-year tenure plan, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have an answer. And I think the main thing is to show what drives you and what's been your passion. So for me, that would be, staying in events, building experiences for people. That's something I still see myself doing long term, of course. Biggest weaknesses and strengths. This is another question I think a lot of people don't like answering, but you should definitely have some points ready to go. And a tip that I've learned for how to answer biggest weakness is, be honest, talk about challenge that you had or an area that you've been working on, and then tie it back to yourself and say, I've been working on becoming more detail oriented, and have an example of a way that you did that recently. So you're still honestly answering the question, but you're also showing that you reflected on it and have been working on answering that weakness as well.
Hey,
And do you have any questions?
I've got an answer about that. A response to that question as well. So, my dad gave me this one. He says that in his interviews, when he gets asked that question, he says his biggest weakness is that he takes on too much responsibility. And sometimes, he thinks that he can do a lot more than he really should be dedicating himself to in order to, maintain that work life balance while also making sure that things are done thoroughly. So that kind of became my go-to was, sometimes I have a tendency to take on too much responsibility.
Yeah, that's another great way of answering that. Do you have any questions for me? I think generally 3 is a good number to shoot for here. I usually bullet point 5 that I want to ask, and I think this should be a mix of questions for the role in the company, but also, personal questions. You can ask the person, how have you, pivoted to different market needs in the times of the pandemic, or, if they mention anything about their personal life, you can also bring that up as well during this time. So some questions in the chat that I'll get to. Connie asked, what if the interviewer only has your reel but not your resume? Should you send your resume before your scheduled interview? Yes, absolutely. Send them, I would say send them whatever you have. If you have a project that's relevant to the role, even outside materials, that's another great way to stand out. And as someone that's interviewed people, if someone emailed me beforehand and shared extra info, that would really help set them apart. But as with everything, just make sure the materials are relevant, which if you're sending a resume, definitely relevant. Kurt asked, how can you figure out the weaknesses and strengths question? Because that's where I struggle the most. Yeah, I think it takes a bit of introspection and, looking through your past experiences. And, I think oftentimes we undersell ourselves when it comes to our strengths. So you can ask, your friends, your family, what do you see as some of my strengths? And oftentimes you'll be pleasantly surprised. Something you may not have thought about yourself, you may hear 2 or 3 people mention as a strength. So ask people around you, think about how you contributed to certain roles, and for weaknesses, show how you've addressed or thought about those areas, and give examples of how you've worked on that as well.
I've got a bit to add to that too. So one piece of advice my college counselor gave to me was when you get asked that question, you should always have 3 adjectives for your strengths. So, the last time I was interviewing, my 3 words were detail oriented, communicative, and self motivated. And you should always be able to back up those 3 words with, some examples or experiences. So, and I have this all written down. It's not like I've memorized this, but so for detail oriented, I'd say something like, I'm very detail oriented. I absolutely love making spreadsheets and make lists for just about everything. And I'm communicative. I'm generally an outgoing person. I have been, told I've been well spoken, and I really get excited from maintaining relationships with people and face to face contact. And I would consider myself to be self motivated too, because I am not afraid to take the lead or take initiative on a project or for a company or for my own, life goals. I started my own small business when I was in college, interning for free because I needed a source of income. And I also founded a Facebook group back in March that now has over 5,000 members regarding streaming. So, I'm willing to put myself out there to achieve my goals. So those were my 3 words. And, my kind of examples always have, and you should do this as part of like preparing beforehand, have your 3 words, like Anum said, ask your parents, talk to people in your network, talk to people, talk to your career counselor, they'll have great advice. And, you should always be able to back up those 3 words, because you never want to get to the interview where they ask you, oh, so you say you're detail oriented, why? What's an example? And then you don't want to, it's so bad to be sitting there, just without an answer, and you don't want to fumble, or it obviously happens, but I think it might trip you up more than it would trip them up. So, that's my strategy for answering the strengths and weaknesses question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think giving, concrete examples like that is always helpful. And, it's another great example of, tying things back to you and also making the job of the interviewer as easy as possible. That's something I think I've mentioned in all of my webinars is, the example Nina gave is perfect, because then the interviewer has 3 points they can write down, they can reference, they can remember you with. They can go to their supervisor and say, oh, this person's great because, she's detail oriented, she's sociable, etc. And it goes back to the example of when you send your follow-up email, again, put those points, put your experience in that email so it's top of mind, and that information is something that the interviewer can easily reference. Connie is asking how long are interviews usually? I find they're usually 30 minutes to an hour. The reality is often for like junior positions, like interns or, similar sort of roles, they're not going to have time to do a full-on hour-long interview. But I think in 30 minutes, that's enough time for you to be able to explain who you are and get your story across. And Nicholas asked, what was the last adjective example? Yeah,
I
what was the
messaged
last?
him. It was
Okay.
self-motivated. So yeah, my 3 are detail oriented, sociable or communicative, and self-motivated. And
Okay.
they should tie into your resume too, right? So, you know, if you have a short bio on your resume, maybe pull some adjectives from there, or, whatever you decide to use for your 3, you should incorporate into your resume so that, it's tailored together. And, because the interview is like selling yourself, right? You're selling yourself to somebody, why they need you, why they should hire you, why you're a great fit for the job. So the most cohesive and prepared and unified you can, present yourself, I would say that, your chances of getting the job are higher.
Another tip I just thought of is that if you can tie that into any of the company's values that they list on the site, that's another great way to stand out. So you may say you're social, and you can say, and I know that one of the values at your company is people that are collaborative and can work cross-functionally. So you have your example that's related to you, and you've also tied it back to the company, which is another great way to stand out. Gloria asked, do you have any advice for what to do if you accidentally mess up? Yeah, I think that's a great question. It happens to everyone. I think just pausing and saying, can just give me a minute, and for example, even if they ask a question that you may not have been prepared for, I've said, oh, that's a great question. Just give me a little bit of time to think. And that's totally fair, to take a couple of seconds, think about how you want to answer it and then go into it. Or if you've messed up, you can say, let me restart that. And again, take a second to pause, think in your head what you want to say, and then say your answer. And I think that also shows that you're self-reflective, you know how to kind of prepare. You're not just speaking to speak, so to say. And acknowledging that is totally fair. Everyone gets nervous during interviews, and I think it also shows that you care a lot about the role, and that it's important to you, which I think is very endearing.
I think also on that note, when you get hit with those questions and you maybe weren't prepared for, another way, like, oh, that's a great question, I will actually restate the question that they just asked me, because one, it buys you time to think about what your answer is. And two, when you're restating the question, you're actually like wrapping your brain around a little bit more what exactly it is they're asking you. So you have that time to reflect, okay, how do I want to answer this? And two, wait, what exactly was the question they asked me again? Because I got a little bit, caught off guard by it. And yeah, like Anum said, just, don't get overly embarrassed. Everyone messes up. We're all human beings at the end of the day. Just keep a smile on your face, and like she said, asked, can I restart that? Actually, I think I have a better way of answering that question. Something along those lines that shows, um, you're not ashamed by messing up. It's okay and it's human, but you're still going to move forward, and you just don't want to let that mess up or slip up kind of take your interview down for the rest of the time you're with this person.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a outline of tell me about yourself. I think this is a question everyone is knows to be prepared for, but oftentimes we don't like preparing for it. So I thought I'd share how I like to answer this. And as with everything, all advice I give, tailor it to yourself. What works for me may not work for you, and vice versa. And at the end of the day, being authentic to who you are is the most important thing. So when I first start this, firstly, I recommend this answer not go past 2 minutes. I think that's generally how much time people have to pay attention and listen. And if you're going past 2 minutes, you're probably either sharing too much detail that you can share later, or mentioning things that aren't super relevant. And the whole point is for the listener to have 3 to 4 points to remember you by at the end of this. So I like starting with the overview sentence so that it kind of sets the stage. Because as soon as you start going into your story, people can kind of get lost. They're kind of trying to piece together all of what you've done so far. So, for me, I may start with something like, what's motivated me has always been creating events and experiences for people and bringing folks together. And, I've had the opportunity to do that both in the US and abroad in my career. So that kind of sets the stage of, what's motivated me, where I've been, things like that. Start with your origin story. Nina and I both mentioned, for us, it's being at university and having access to all these amazing events and shows, and being immersed in these experiences. And I think showing that heart is something that goes a long way. For other people, it may be that one movie or director that just really resonated with you. And feel free to spend a lot of time on this, because I think, again, people want to see that you're passionate about the actual role in the field. Then I think going chronological into 3 to 4 main highlights of what you've done is great. You may be saying, I don't have 3 to 4 roles to reference. That's totally fine. You can talk about projects that you've done. It may even be forums that you're actively discussing different music in, or different movies in, and talk about some of the conversations you've had, how that's led to you wanting to intern at this company. It doesn't strictly have to be job experience. And one thing that is a little bit of a tangent, but if you are looking for opportunities, using your university and the concert club there, or the live events club, the people that put on campus events is a great way to start with getting experience in media. And oftentimes you'll have a lot more responsibility if it's a student position. And that's a great way to start building that experience as well. I always like to mention personal motivators, again, tying it back to my values, who I am, why I'm passionate about this specific field. And if you're interviewing for media, I think this is a given. You are going to have some reason why this field resonates with you. And then at the end, I always like to tie it back to the company or role, because again, that makes the job for the interviewer easy, where they can see why you'd fit in. So I would say something like, I've loved working at events and entertainment, and I've learned a lot on the marketing side, and my goal now is to learn more about operations and finance so I can expand my scope. And that's why this position at your company in operations for this festival promoter really spoke to me, and is something that I'm eager to get into. So that again ties it back to the role, and just again makes the job as easy as possible for the person interviewing you to see why you'd be a good fit. Some tips and tricks. So one thing, and this got me my job in Qatar, was just reading the news about the company and mentioning that in the interview. So, everyone knows what Disney does, for example, but if you go to, and literally I'll just type in, Disney marketing, for example, if you're interviewing for a marketing role, go on the news tab in Google and look up what's happening right now in that company, in that department, and mention that in your interview. And I find that always impresses people when they know that, oh, this person knows what we're doing right now. So another example was I was interviewing for a media company and it was for a marketing role. And I mentioned the name of the current campaign that they had running by name. And I could see the person who was interviewing me, his face lit up because he was the one responsible for executing that campaign, building it out. And, it was as simple as me going online, looking up what this company is doing in terms of marketing right now and tying that into the interview. And I think especially if an intern is able to do that, it's even more impressive. Ask the interviewer about themselves, and this doesn't have to be waiting until the end when they say, oh, do you have any questions for me? You can tie it in organically with what you're saying. So, and it goes back to what Nina was saying about flipping the script. So, you can ask them, how did you get the role here? What motivated you to, pursue this position? It's no secret that people in media love talking about themselves. So, if you can get the interviewer to do that, they generally will enjoy it. Have 2 to 3 stories ready that you can mold. This was something Nicholas was mentioning in the chat, and I think is super important. And I just like to have, 3 that I have kind of ready to go, and, set the stage, explain what you did, and then the impact of that. And again, tie it back to your personal motivators. And this goes to really kind of elaborating your answers and making them, even more, basically painting a bigger picture. So, someone may ask, what experience do you have in marketing? And you can say things like, I know how to do Google Ads, social media, build email lists. That's a sort of like average answer. But if you're able to then give an example, that's what takes that average answer to something more memorable. So you can say, for example, I was part of the concert promotion team at my school. And, I was the person that built the email list from scratch. And I did it from, this step A all the way to step Z. And now we have 5,000 people on this mailing list. So any sort of way that you can sort of back up what you're saying with the example or a story is always helpful. Sean asked about tips during the pandemic. I think most interviews are happening online, so one thing I always do is I put post-it notes around my computer of high level points I want to make sure to mention that either I may forget or I want to have as a reference. So that could be facts about the company. It could be facts about this person and what they've done. And if you reference it quickly on the side, they're not even going to know that you have notes around your computer. And this is something that a lot of people do. One caveat with this is make sure you don't have a mirror behind you, because then they can obviously see that you have post-its around your computer. And that also goes with checking that the lighting is on your face. You don't have any weird shadows. I think now most people know those things because we've all gotten used to living on Zoom. But yeah, the post-its I always find really helpful when I'm interviewing, and it kind of gives me peace of mind that I don't have to know everything. I have a quick reference for things I may forget.
On that note, I would say that interviewing over Zoom is actually easier than interviewing in person because of that specific reason. I have my notes on my actual notes on my computer. So, I mean, when I quickly glance over, I'm doing it right now, you can barely even tell that I just looked at a reference. So, that's my trick, is just type it up on your notes on your computer and you have it on your screen already. But I think interviewing over Zoom, and I've had a lot of Zoom interviews. I think it's actually easier because, you're at home, you're in your environment, there is a screen in between you. You're not sitting in the room with that person. And I would say in-person interviews, body language plays way more of a factor than it would obviously over camera. But that's a tip for when in-person interviews do resume, just remember to have, sit with your shoulders straight. I'm not really doing that right now, but sit back with your shoulders straight and, good posture, confident posture. Try not to fidget too much in your chair. I always like wonder, what do I do with my hands? So I'll kind of like do this and place them in my lap. It helps me keep my posture good and prevents my hands from just like tapping around on a desk while if you're nervous. So sidebar, but
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing also with eye contact is if you actually look at the camera, like the point where the camera is coming out on your computer, that's the same as making eye contact with the person. And that's a more effective way of doing a Zoom interview because it's, again, building that connection, and it doesn't look as obvious that you're, staring at a screen, for example. So that's one thing that I've learned through interviewing on Zoom. Another thing I don't mention here, but I think is helpful if you can do it, is if you can sort of, so if you've gotten an interview, and you're preparing, you're trying to figure out, what do I say in there? If you can kind of contact anyone that works at the company that, maybe is an intern, a recent graduate, a young professional, or someone who went to your school, it's totally fine to email and say, hey, I'm interviewing for this role. Do you have a couple of minutes to chat, or would love to just learn a little bit more so I'm fully prepared. I think that, again, shows that you want this position really badly. You really want to learn. And that way you'll have insider info that you can reference in the interview that other people won't have. And you may say like, oh, it's kind of weird to reach out to people like this. But oftentimes, I think, especially if you talk to someone who knows what it's like to be in your position or went to the same school as you, people will be willing to help, and just kind of share what exactly is going on internally at the company, what are the priorities for the department you're interviewing at, and any way you can tie that into your answers is a great way to stand out. One thing I like to do is wear bright colors and heavier makeup. I think it just kind of looks more vibrant on camera. And, again, maybe you don't like doing that, totally up to you, but this is a tip I learned that I like. And it also helps me just feel more confident if I'm dressed up. I know, I like how I look. So, especially with makeup, if you go heavier, it actually looks better on video because you're oftentimes going to be washed out anyways. So that's just another personal tip. Kurt asks, would you say it's a better idea not to name drop someone within the company if they helped you get to the interview, or if they were the one that made you aware of the company? Yeah, name dropping is always great. People love to say, oh yeah, I know that person, or oh, she and I worked together on this project before. So anytime you can name drop, and again, it should be an authentic connection, of course, someone that you've built a relationship with. There's definitely no harm to doing that, and something that I would encourage.
Just don't name drop somebody you barely have talked to before. That would be the one case where you shouldn't name drop. If that person doesn't know you by name, don't name drop them, because
Yeah.
the last thing you want is your interviewer to go ask this person or go say, oh, hey, I had, Anum come in for an interview today. She was really great. She mentioned that she knew you. And that person goes, oh, yeah, I think I know her. And you're in the interview saying, oh yeah, I know this person, they're really great. So that would be the one case you would want to avoid the name drop. But yeah, no, it's a great thing to have, and shows that you're kind of already have relationships within the company. So yeah, name dropping is great. I always name drop if I have the ability to.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a way to kind of work around that I've done is say, I really have admired the work of this person at your company, or I've been following how they've helped grow this department, or I heard them speak at a webinar. So that way you're making it clear, this person doesn't know you, but it shows that you've invested in the company beyond what other people may mention. And
Yeah.
people don't expect you to know someone in the C-suite level, for example, but you may be following them on LinkedIn and admire them for various reasons. I always think it's totally fine to mention that, as long as you're specific about what you like about that person.
It's a really great point, especially when you don't have a contact within the company. If you don't have a personal contact, I think that's a really great way to show that you are personally, involved and interested in the company without, having that pre-existing relationship.
I always ask details about the role afterward. This is where you'll often get a lot of good information to reference. And this is especially helpful if you're in a round one, round two interview, and you know there's a couple of rounds, especially at these larger companies, we know it can take a couple of interviews to get a role. So always, be open to asking your round one, maybe with the recruiter. So ask them details about the role. What is this department focusing on right now? What qualities do you think they're looking for in the intern? And as soon as the interview is done, the first thing I always do is write notes about everything I talked about with the interviewer, what they mentioned about the company. And the only way to do that is to build that two-way conversation and also ask them questions. But if you have those internal notes, and you can reference them in your later rounds, and that's another great way to stand out. They'll say, oh, how did this person know that this is exactly what the department's working on right now? It's because you asked, people in previous rounds of interviews, or you may have reached out to someone separately and said, hey, I'm interviewing for this role. Do you have a couple of minutes to chat? Any sort of insider info you can get is always helpful. And it shows that you're really serious about this role and helping the company with what they need right now. And better if you even have a story of how you've done that with your previous experience.
It's also a great reference for your follow-up email as well. You have those notes to use in the follow-up email. And, let's say you forget to mention something in the interview, happens all the time. You can include that in your follow-up email. Yeah, you just want to, in the follow-up email, just a quick touch on what that typically looks like. It's just a restatement of, who you are, why you're a great fit for the job, your experience, qualifications, interest, and thank you for the opportunity. You should always close with, thank you for the opportunity, looking forward to hearing from you soon. And the follow-up, you can send follow-up emails. I mean, people have different opinions on how frequently you should send them. I send a follow-up email right after the interview, if not that same day, the next day at the absolute latest. You do not want to wait more than a day to send your follow-up email. You can also ask, assuming that they respond to that follow-up email, you can ask, how long, if they didn't mention in the interview, you can ask, how long should I expect to hear back about something, because you want to know how much you should follow up if you haven't heard. So yeah, make sure you follow up. I would send follow-up emails like if you have every 4 days at the max, like that's a lot. But you want to keep yourself in, the front of their mind, and the follow-up email is a great way to do that.
I think also the reality is that a lot of things are changing internally at companies, especially in media, especially, given the state of the world. So it's a reality that it's probably going to take you longer to hear back. So the more that you can keep following up and stay top of mind, the better. It's very common for roles to get put on hold. You may have gotten to the final round and thought, okay, this is definitely, the position's definitely there. And then all of a sudden it gets pulled. That's extremely common. And one thing also is make sure you keep a log of everyone who you talk to at every company, because you never know who's going to end up at another place you may be interested in, who you want to follow up with later. I may have talked to some people when I was interviewing and then reached out, or interviewing for internships, and then reached out to them a year or two later when I was applying to full-time jobs. That's totally normal, especially if you did build that relationship with them, they know who you are. Keep a log of every single person that you talk to, because you never know who you'll run into in the future. So with that, we're going to wrap up with the presentation part and open it up to Q&A. Before I do that, I wanted to share Creative University. We have opportunities, as I mentioned before, internships have become available, but also opportunities to help grow the program itself. So things like web development, building out partnerships. And as I've mentioned, if you have any of your own ideas of ways you'd like to help us build this program out, definitely let us know, apply to the program. And we're always open to hearing from students and help us help you is essentially how Peter always puts it. And I think that's the best way of thinking about that. And something I always like to share is that as long as you keep trying, it will happen. I think staying motivated is something that is very challenging, especially in this time. And I had those moments of doubt last year when I was applying to jobs, but I just kept telling myself the only way to fail would be to not try. And that means make sure I'm putting in consistent time into doing outreach, following up with people, reading the news, researching different companies. So as long as you keep trying different paths, oftentimes the first internship you get may not be at your dream company, but that experience will be extremely valuable for when you do move on to other roles. And this has happened to me numerous times now where, I didn't know where an opportunity would lead, but it ended up actually being very valuable for my next step in my career. And with that, always build those relationships along the way. And the whole point of Creative University is that this was created as a give back, and any way that you can help other people, I think is just a good personal value to live by. And so on that note, final thing before we go to Q&A, this is my email. I'm always happy to chat with students. If you have any specific questions, you want me to review any sort of materials, maybe you have an interview and you want to kind of talk through that, always happy to help. So feel free to email me, and happy to chat offline about any of that. So with that, we'll go to questions. You can either type in the chat or unmute yourself and just ask in person, ask that way. So let's see. So Connie asks, what if you ask about opportunities in a company, but they say they're not taking for the moment because of the pandemic? Is it okay to ask them to review your materials reel for feedback if you sent it already? Yeah, definitely. Feel free to, ask for feedback. You may not always get it because, people are obviously busy, but just the fact that you're sending material, I think is a great idea. And again, keep a log of that person, the last date you talked to them. And, in a case where they say there aren't opportunities, it doesn't really make sense to follow up in a week. I would wait a month and then message them again and ask, do you have any opportunities? And again, put that info top of mind of, this is my background, this is why I'm passionate about this company, and this is ways that I can help. Because you never know when an opportunity may come about. Oftentimes in media, things are very project based. So there may not be a position right now, but in a couple of weeks, they may need an intern for something. And one tip I've shared before is read the key industry newsletters and look for places where someone's starting a new company, a new division is starting of a company you may be interested in, and try to target roles that way. Because oftentimes when something is getting off the ground, that's when they really need interns to help. So that's another tip that I've had success with. Nina, would you like to share?
Yeah, so I just thought of one more thing when you were talking about, just never not giving up, keep trying, especially considering, the state of the world we're in. We're in a pandemic, economy is not, in the greatest of states. Jobs and internships aren't coming by as easily. In between, I would say April, I started looking for jobs seriously in March and April as I graduated in May. And between that period of time to when I got hired at Bulldog in July, I had interviewed 4 or 5 times and made it to the final round of interviews at 3 different companies, all of which the interviews went great. I thought, I was a strong candidate, and I waited over 2 months to find out that the job had been pulled. So, and I interviewed at, it was a partnership marketing job at the Saints and Pelicans. It was a marketing manager role at Live Nation. So these were big companies, but everyone was, especially back then, everyone was really struggling, and, a lot of people were losing jobs. The point of this is that I found myself getting pretty discouraged after not only had I done the whole process of networking, interviewing, doing all of that, and then something out of my control kind of took that opportunity away from me. It was definitely discouraging, but like Anum said, like, you have to just keep trying and keep persevering, keep looking for those opportunities. Eventually, something will come up. How I got the job at Bulldog, I attended a virtual networking event through my university at Tulane. It replaced the typical in-person networking event, and I met a contact there who connected me to my now boss, the CEO and founder of our company, John Petrocelli. So you never know where the opportunity might come up. It's definitely hard not to get discouraged when things don't go the way you think they should, or things don't go the way as planned. But yeah, the only way you'll ever not succeed is if you just stop trying.
Yeah,
So
that's a
that,
great point. I think anyone in this industry, no matter what level, has dealt with rejection, setbacks, and oftentimes I think that's one of the key markers of people that make it far in media and entertainment is they're just not willing to give up, at the end of the day.
right.
So a couple people have asked about salary. Yeah, I think that's a great question. We don't talk about it as often as we should. A couple of notes on this. Start with your college counselors, anyone that kind of has a good benchmark into what people in the past have, gotten hired for. Sometimes I've even asked my friends straight up. And the more that we can be open about salary negotiations, I think the better. But obviously that may not be always possible. I know like all my internships in undergrad were unpaid for college credit, which is very common in media. That is changing. I think more and more positions are at least offering minimum wage. But when all my internships were unpaid, so I worked a job on campus at a front desk for one of the dorms that was open 24 hours. So I'd intern maybe 12 to 6 and then come back and work at night at the front desk. So I just found different ways to kind of make it work. But of course not everyone has that opportunity, I think. And if they say there's no way, it's only for college credit, or we're just not paying, you have to work for free, it's oftentimes a personal decision. You have to look at your own finances, if you have time to work some position where you can make money. But also ask your school. Sometimes they have scholarships for things like this, where I got a stipend at UCLA for an unpaid internship that was just provided by the school. And schools now are more conscious of the fact that oftentimes internships are unpaid, and that can create equity issues. So tell your college counselor, be straight up about it. They may have some money there that you can use. But generally I think internships in media, especially for undergrads, is generally going to be minimum wage. But again, ask around, ask your counselors. And also I always like to practice how I'm going to broach that subject, because it can be a nervous question to answer. So the more you can sort of practice. Another tip I've gotten is give a range. So you don't have to give a specific number. Or one thing I like doing is if someone asks me like, what's your salary expectation? If it's especially an early round, I like to say, oh, can I come back to you? Or, let me think about this, and I'll come back to you with a number later. There's nothing wrong with, buying a little more time, especially if it's an early round. If it's like just a phone screen with a recruiter, they'll usually say, yeah, that's fine. You can get back to us later. But, I don't know if you have any ways or any tips for this question, because I think it's probably one that's kind of the least obvious answer, or the least clear answer.
Right. Yeah. I would say Glassdoor is also a great reference when looking for a
Mm,
number.
yeah.
There's a lot of public information on there. You likely can look up the exact role you're applying for. And this is more applicable, I would say, for jobs than internships. I have never gone into an internship where they asked me my expected salary. It's pretty much only for jobs. I use Glassdoor to look up references. Like I said, I'll ask people if that opportunity is available. I always provide a range, unless it's like, an automated form when you're applying that asks you to put in a number. I'll just, try to guess a number. Don't make sure with that, don't go too high, because you might get actually filtered out. If your number is too high, then let's say they want to pay this position 40K a year, and if you put 45, your application might get filtered out. So in that scenario, it's best to put lower. But when you're actually having salary negotiations, in the interview, you always want to have a range of a lower number and a higher number. Typically, you'll settle on somewhere in the middle. Um, I took a negotiations class when I was in college, and we spent, a whole month talking about salary negotiations. Like Anum said, it's kind of this like elusive subject that people don't like to talk about, but there are really great resources on the internet. I'm sure there's YouTube videos where if you're going into that, salary negotiation, definitely study it up beforehand because it is a negotiation and you want to make sure you have your BATNA, which is best alternative to a negotiated agreement. You want to make sure you have leverage. So salary negotiations, long story short, they can be tricky, but do some research beforehand.
Connie asks, what do you do if you contacted two people at the same company and they gave you different answers about future positions? Yeah, that definitely happens, especially at larger media companies. The truth is people just don't have visibility across the organization, and one team may be in a certain position, one team may be in another. What I would do in that case is, again, keep a log of who you talked to, what date, and exactly what they told you, so you can reference that next time you follow up with them. Obviously try to focus on the person who said, hey, we may have some positions in a month. That's clear to me that, okay, I need to follow up with that person in 3 weeks, ideally before the position becomes public. If someone says, oh, we don't have anything right now, thanks, but I can't help you, that's okay. You can always try to email them if you see any news, anything that reminds you of the conversation that you did have with them. And again, you can also follow up with them later, but, again, don't be too pushy, but at the same time, I always say anyone that you've connected with, you can always follow up, but do it in a smart way and keep notes of exactly who said what, so you can reference exactly that. Nicholas asked, do you have any suggestions on coming into an interview confident rather than trying to impress the interviewer?
That's a great question. That's a
Yeah,
really great question.
One tip that I like to do is, actually physically smile and hold a smile before your interview. And now that most of them are through Zoom, this is even easier to do. And it's been proven scientifically, that puts you in a more confident state of mind. It makes you more it makes me more conversational rather than trying to remember, oh, I have to make sure to get through points 1 through 3. I just things just flow more naturally for me. So if you can just literally practice in your room smiling before the interview, that helps. And I think for me, knowing that I've done my research, I have my main bullet points, and hearing myself beforehand practicing and hearing, oh, this is how I'm answering the question, this sounds pretty good. Doing mock interviews is always helpful, and that can even be with a friend. Tell them, I want to practice these 5 questions, can you ask me this, hear what I have to say, and then provide feedback. And it can even be your sibling, anyone can help with that. And then for me, I feel confident when I know I have my notes around my computer, because then I'm not worried that, oh, I may forget something. And match the tone of the interviewer. Oftentimes they may be someone very casual. They may not even want to hear about all the research you've done and all the experience that you have. They may just want to kind of casually talk to someone about music or about TV. And doing that and matching their kind of tone and energy is actually going to get you a lot further than trying to make sure you get through all your main points. So that's some insight that's helped me. I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, so I think confidence is super key, super important when going into an interview. Also remember, you likely have less experience than the person you're interviewing. So, you don't want to try to overly impress them because you're coming to them looking for a job. Just kind of like remember the dynamic of the situation you're entering. They likely have interviewed for this position before, they've likely worked in this position before. You never want to try to one up the person interviewing you. But remaining confident, I think, yeah, a smile on your face goes such a long way. That makes you seem more open and more likable. Also, like, I'll listen to my favorite music, like some songs that get me hyped up beforehand. That way I'm like, I got those endorphins rushing and I'm like in a good mood. Other than that, I think doing your research is so important because you can actually have a conversation with the person interviewing you, and that shows that you are confident if you're able to hold a conversation with somebody in a slightly uncomfortable or a state of pressure. One of my interviews lasted an hour and a half. This was over Zoom. One of my interviews lasted an hour and a half because me and the person interviewing me were just talking about the state of the industry and things we'd seen before that we liked and things we saw that didn't work, and how COVID we thought was going to shake everything up. So I think that way, I wasn't trying to impress her like, oh, I know more about your job than you. It was more so, well, I've done my research and here are my thoughts, but I'm curious, what do you think? So having a conversation with people is a great way to have confidence without being overly impressed, without trying to overly impress somebody. Just try to relax too. That's The smile will help you relax. So like Anum said, I mean, smiling genuinely makes your body more relaxed, more likable. Um, you're more likely to be calm going in. So yeah, that was a great question though. I had to think about it for a little bit.
Yeah, I think just to highlight what Nina said, asking questions in the middle of the interview and saying, what do you think about that? Or what was your experience doing this? That's a great way to also, if you're kind of feeling like you're trying to overly impress, let them talk for a little bit. And then you can also give yourself a bit of a break. And something Nina mentioned earlier is no one expects the intern to know everything. And if you come in with that attitude, that you're probably not a good fit anyways. So kind of going in understanding that more often than not, people just want an intern who is willing to learn and show what they, admit what they don't know, but be willing to, open themselves up to new ideas and new ways of working. That's actually more important. Nicholas asked, is it bad to break eye contact on Zoom? I've been told that I was straying away from the camera too often. Yeah, I think one thing is turn off all your apps, turn off all your notifications. It's very obvious when you're interviewing on Zoom that someone got a message and then they're checking the ping that's in the corner. So even like, and I practice this daily, I have no notifications on my computer because I find getting that, the number, the red getting, higher and higher for whatever app, it's just distracting at the end of the day and not personally good for my mental health. So turn off all your notifications. One thing that I've heard from someone else is that they actually put an arrow, like they'll take a Post-it and draw an arrow to the point on their camera that they should be looking at. So that kind of helps remind them, okay, I need to keep staring at this to make eye contact. But obviously you can look away time to time, but it's different if you're kind of looking out to the window or kind of looking out to think versus checking a message that may have come in. And also turn off all the sound on your notifications also, because that, everyone knows, oh, this person's getting a WhatsApp message or a Slack message. So I think that's also a helpful way to kind of avoid looking distracted or, avoid like breaking eye contact. All right, does anyone have any other questions? Feel free to put that in the chat, or if you want to come and speak, happy to hear from people that way as well. I'll put my email in here again one more time if you have any questions you'd like to chat about offline. Happy to answer those as well.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put my email and LinkedIn profile in here as well. Also very happy to answer any questions, offer any advice, and if there's anything I said that you wanted to learn more a little bit about, feel free to contact me.
When would you be available to schedule a mock interview? Yeah, email me, let me know what you're interviewing for. If you have if you have a deadline, like, oh, this interview is the next week, let me know. And you can always come with questions that you want to practice. Maybe you want to practice telling me about yourself, so we can start with that. And I'll also toss in a couple of questions just so that you're kind of practicing being taking questions off the cuff as well. But yeah, feel free to send me an email. We can set that up. All right, great. If there aren't any more questions, I will be wrapping this up. Again, this was the last part in the 3-part series of how to land your dream job / internship. And I really enjoyed building this programming out. The first time I did this sort of student session, I think we had maybe 5 people. So it's been great to see that this has expanded beyond that. And encourage people, if you have clubs you're part of, other friends, let them know about Creative University. Definitely apply to the program. I hear a lot of people who want to get involved, but then we never see their application. So definitely make sure to follow through on that. That's really step one. And Nicholas asked, will you and Nina host more in the coming months? We definitely can. Let me know, what specifically you'd like to hear about. The past sessions are on YouTube, so you can see kind of the content that I've already covered, and then also, build off of that. One idea that I was thinking about was having a music specific session. That's my background, that's Nina's. A lot of students who've reached out to me have been specifically interested in music, and someone who loves the industry, always happy to chat about that. Yes, the application's on that website. All right, great. Thanks everyone. And, personally, really want to thank Nina for coming and, sharing your story. I think it's always helpful to hear from someone, in similar shoes, hear examples of what's worked. And, like I said, I think there's so many parallels between our stories, and it really comes down to just being persistent, preparing, and keeping those relationships going, which is the most important thing.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for everyone, for your awesome questions and just being a really engaged audience. Makes it so much easier to talk about things when people are participating. So
Definitely. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Hope to see you at a future program, and enjoy the rest of your weekends. Bye.